Good evening. Welcome to the 23rd meeting of fiscal year 2016 Milton Planning Board. I'm Brian Furs. I'm the chairman. I will ask the members to introduce themselves around the table.
I'm Alex Whiteside, and I'm a member.
Julia Getman, clerk.
Tim Serwinski, Assistant Town Planner.
April Lamoureux, the newest member.
Cheryl Tagayas, member.
We'll start with a non-agenda item. We will welcome our newest member,
Thank you.
April Lamoureux. Thank you for your volunteering for the town in advance.
Shouldn't we put her on a committee?
We will do that shortly, I believe. We actually will need to be redoing our committee shortly, so it would be a good night for you to be absent, actually, April. I'm going to run through the agenda quickly. We have some couple quick administrative items. Our next meeting dates are May 2nd, 3rd, and tentatively 5th for Milton Town meeting. We have a May 7th site walk, which will begin at 8 a.m. at 1 Kinsale Lane. And we have our May 12th regularly scheduled planning board meeting. We're also going to approve some minutes. We have citizens speak. We have a discussion of a cluster development for 245 Highland Street. And we have some old business that we will run through. We have no meetings by appointment tonight.
Brian, the town meeting, what time are we meeting?
I think those meetings are at 6:30.
6:30.
So we're meeting at 6:30?
Why are we meeting?
It's a good question.
Why don't we just not meet?
Do we post?
We are posted, but,
I mean, we have no agenda. We have nothing to discuss.
I mean,
If something
cancel
big
it.
comes up, Tim
It won't come
can,
up, it won't come up Monday night anyway. We can always meet Tuesday night if we need to, I would assume.
But do we need to be able to be open during town meeting?
no.
No, okay.
yeah, I think it's implicit, right? that during
Being there is good enough.
Okay,
I'm fine with
Thank
7
you.
o'clock for Monday. We can evaluate during town meeting if we need to meet earlier on Tuesday for some reason.
So do you want me to take that meeting down, or do you want me to change it to 7?
You can change it to 7. That way we're posted as meeting at 7 o'clock as part of town meeting. Okay.
Oh, can I just, one more thing?
please.
There's an issue about Woodmere, A65 Brush Hill, that I'm going to consider under next meeting dates, because I did put them on the agenda for the 3rd. But Ned is going to be here later, and he's going to talk about it, so I just wanted to put that out there. It was a fence thing,
It's a fence issue.
yeah.
It's going to be on Tuesday.
Well, he's going to bring it up tonight, and then you can discuss if you want to save it until Tuesday or talk about it.
Oh, okay.
We may have
I
time.
didn't mean- I
We may
didn't-
have time to do it tonight unless it needs to be by appointment.
I don't mean to be ominous. It's just I wanted to make sure that that was on the table.
Before we move on to meeting minutes, just quickly for post-town meetings as we start to get ready to schedule things, I just wanted to check with the board to see if Thursdays were still our preference and 7 p.m. was still our preference. 7 p.m. is still my preference. But I did want to give everyone the opportunity to weigh in on the day for sure and the time as well. Any need to change or any concerns? No? Right, great. We will continue at 7 p.m. on Thursdays, 2nd and 4th, generally speaking. We did have meetings from March 24th to approve. Julia, I had 2 very minor changes which may have come through for someone else, I'm not sure. But I'll just tell you what they are, and then I'll hand this down so everyone can hear them. Section 3, 4th line down, I just added issues of roadway width, not issues of width, just width. And then I changed water gardens in that same section on the probably 3rd or 4th line from the bottom to rain gardens. So unless anybody else has comments, I would take a motion to approve the meeting minutes for March 24th as amended.
I gave you comments on the 24th, didn't I? Okay, so
And those were incorporated in the ones I just handed you? Yeah, okay.
Okay, so I move that.
All right, second? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
I'm abstaining because I wasn't here.
Thank you. Okay, citizen speak. Is there anyone from the citizens who would like to? Okay, Mr. Sloan, come on up.
Thank you. Greetings. Again, greetings to the newest member.
Thank you.
I wish you good success with the planning board. Joe Sloan from 55 Concord Ave. I know that you have on your agenda for tonight some discussion of town meeting process and things that relate to the planning board at town meeting. I wanted to add some comments and really first off a question in regards to the warrant and the way Articles 40 and 42, which are the bed and breakfast article and the non-conforming businesses article, are presented in the warrant, I believe is leading to some confusion. I've talked to a few people about it to see if the thoughts that I had were in fact things that other people were thinking about, and I think it warranted speaking to it tonight. Specifically, as is printed, the warrant committee's recommendation is pretty much the same for those two articles, the comment that is made, but the recommendation, the fact that both of these articles were in fact voted by town meeting in February to be sent back to the planning board, the recommendation is that again in the warrant. The actual recommendation is that the town vote to refer the subject matter of the article to the planning board for further study. But as it was voted in February, it already sits with the planning board. So the town meeting technically does not have to vote again to send it back because the planning board isn't bringing anything different forward.
Town
And that-
meeting hasn't voted on these articles yet at this point.
Right, the Ice House was a different deal. The Ice House zoning was not this zoning,
This is something totally
Right.
different.
So,
although it would include the Ice House.
That is
right. Thank you for clarifying that.
So just to, I'll
So-
just interrupt you again just for a moment. So the planning board submitted 2 articles to the warrant for May town meeting, not February. Yes?
3.
3. Okay, I'm sorry. Yes, 3. Okay, good point. Thank you for clarifying. All of them are being recommended to be sent back to planning board.
Except
One
for
of them,
one.
Except for one.
one
Two
of
of
them.
them
Well, we have 4 articles actually.
Right.
One is the tax, which is being sent back. So I'm sorry. We recommended 4 articles. One is being recommended for approval, which is just a administrative correction under the zoning bylaw. One is a tax bylaw, which is being sent back, I believe, to planning board, which will then send it to Board of Selectmen for further study, most likely. The other 2 that you're speaking about, those were put forward by the planning board for consideration on the May town warrant. They were then discussed, as you were part of the process, by the public in public hearings. The planning board made a recommendation that the warrant committee recommend that those 2 articles be sent back to the planning board for further study, which the warrant committee then made that recommendation. So the warrant committee is asking the town to vote to send those 2 articles back to this board for further study. This board will speak on the evening of whichever night those are heard to introduce the articles, and will reiterate its recommendation that those articles come back to us for further study.
Okay, I apologize for my confusion. There was
Nothing to apologize for.
yeah, no, there was so much going on
Mr. Whiteside
between February and May.
clarify
so-
whatever I said wrong
Yeah,
as well.
One point is that our recommendation is actually to the town meeting. We are going to recommend to the town meeting to send it back, and the warrant committee is also going
Agrees
to
with us.
recommend to the town meeting to send it back. And if the town meeting is on the ball, that's what it'll do.
Brian?
I'm going to let Mr. Sloan finish just because it's citizen speak, but unless.
I just want to make a clarification
Okay.
on
Okay,
his,
sorry.
his question. The article at the February town meeting was a citizen's petition, and that we review, but we don't initiate. So when it's sent back to the planning board for further study, it's actually really it's not something we initiated, so it's not something we've been asked to take up by the citizens who put that petition forward. So right now, that has not progressed anything differently from where it was the day of that vote at town meeting. So just for clarification.
We've been asked to study it. They sent it not for further study, they sent it to us for study.
Right.
And we've been talking a little bit about it, not a lot.
Did you have anything else?
No, I think the other piece of that, and again, I do apologize for getting a couple of things kind of
Totally
interspersed here,
understood.
but
There's a lot going on.
I think that the other, it's a very lengthy comment from the warrant committee for those two articles that would in fact be coming back. And I think the piece that the warrant committee suggested about the town meeting being the location or the venue, if you will, for kind of an open dialogue on something that the planning board will be acknowledging publicly at town meeting is something that the planning board hasn't yet formulated. I'm not sure that that is the best process for something like that. I agree that there was very good process that has taken place thus far with good feedback and lots of good suggestions that were made, but I'm not sure that the town meeting time, given the length of the warrant and where these articles fall, is in fact going to be the best use of town meeting time at that point. But
Okay,
leave it there.
thank you.
Thanks very much.
All right, we have some new business on the agenda, but Mr. Corcoran is, I believe, with the Board of Selectmen right now.
Yeah.
So we will defer on that and move into our old business.
Can I just ask those warrants that I passed out, if you can bring those back, not right now, but by the end of the meeting? I borrowed those from the selectman's office.
I'm going to give those back to
I
you.
brought my own.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't have mine at home.
I'll most definitely take it with me if I don't give it back to you now. So I have actually expanded our old business section or re-worded it a little bit for purposes of moving us along tonight. Tim was, we have three things that I'd like to talk about, and if anybody else has anything under new business, we can consider that as well. Zoning issues, Tim has been very helpful in putting together a draft schedule for us to look at different zoning initiatives over the next 8 or 9 meetings. So I'm going to pass that out in a minute, and we can discuss it. We're going to go through the May 16th town meeting to just talk about May 2016 town meeting, excuse me, to talk a little bit about what planning board will say and with regard to the 2 articles we were just discussing. And then I just have a note on here, mostly for myself, that I owe everybody a letter that we are going to send regarding the Milton trolley. So I just noticed that I had not done that yet, and I will get that to everybody, but I'm going to leave it on here, so, Tim, so I don't forget about it. So I'll pass out the schedule to start, and that will lead us into conversations we need to have. So again, Tim put this together for us to sort of back into some schedule as to how we can discuss the 3 items that we'll have in front of us. And I've actually added a potential 4th for us to consider. But we backed into the schedule by Tim assumed, I think rightfully, that the traditional date for town meeting is the last Monday in October. There has been some discussion about postponing that due to the presidential election, but I think for purposes of scheduling, we're going to go ahead and assume that it's going to be the traditional date. As such, we backed off of that date 8 weeks, which was the selectmen's recommendation for the closing of the warrant, and that is September 5th. And between the May 12th meeting and September 5th, we have 9 regularly scheduled meetings if we meet on the 2nd and 4th Thursdays. So as you can see, I've put together, or Tim and I have put together this schedule. Tonight we can discuss possibly just if anybody wants to have a subcommittee for purposes of any drafting. That would largely relate to signs, I think, although I think for the most part all 3 bylaws are somewhat drafted, at least initially. I'd like to discuss whether or not the board wants to contemplate putting forward the idea of having an alternate for this board. I'd be very interested in hearing Alex Whiteside's comments about that, because I think it's been discussed in the past, but it has not been discussed during my tenure, so it'd be interesting to hear what you think about that. And then, as you can see, I don't have to read the schedule out loud, but we basically alternate the different uses, the different zoning ideas every other week, leading up to public workshops in July for the two big ones, non-conforming and bed and breakfast, three big ones, and signs. And then we'd have our either submission of final language or decision at that point not to move anything forward by September 5th. So that is the presentation. If you don't mind, I'd love to start with the alternate. I'd love to get your feelings on that.
Well, the question about the alternate is, do we need an alternate? And I think that an alternate is all right. Should the alternate be appointed or elected? And what would the term of the alternate be? 1 year, 2 years? And then there should be a procedure for using the alternate. How would we be proposing that this would work? Just because if we say we want an alternate, we really should have a procedure for using an alternate, how the alternate would fit in. I mean, if someone is late to a meeting and the alternate has been asked to serve, presumably that person could simply look at the little bit of the tape that they missed and the alternate would get bumped. But if it was a second missed meeting and he or she had already watched the tape of the first missed meeting, then a little bit of missing of a meeting would presumably if the alternate was seated, the alternate would then serve. And the alternate, of course, would have to, I mean, how would the alternate, if it was the middle of the meeting that the use of the alternate came to be necessary because someone was sick and missed the meeting, and then the alternate had to take over, does the alternate just have to sit in the audience in the first meeting, or should the alternate be at the table for most meetings? I mean,
can the alternate participate in the discussions but not vote?
It's more than just having an alternate, having some sort of rules for use of an alternate, and then determining whether or not we want to elect the alternate, or we want the voters to elect the alternate, or if we want the selectmen to join us in electing the alternate. And presumably the planning board, if 5 members agree, could outvote the selectmen on such a election. But if there were differing feelings, then if the selectmen got their act together, presumably they could basically determine who the alternate would be. So,
Okay. How does the rest of the board feel?
I think this had come up before as
Yeah.
a suggestion, and I think the last time it came up, as best I recall, I don't know if we voted, but I think the planning board was of the mind that it wasn't necessary.
Okay.
That was actually going to be my question. Why is it
And
necessary?
I think the
Has there
reason it's coming up right now is we've had 2 or 3 situations over the last couple of months, last year probably, where we were down to 4 members. And so that requires obviously a unanimous vote, but it also requires those 4 members to never miss a meeting. And if they do miss a meeting, we either have to cancel the public hearing and reschedule it. But with there in particular, we were running down to the wire on the clock, and we had to make a decision, and we were running out of days. So there are times where if there's only 4 of us and we need 4 members to vote, and we get into a situation where we have a deadline or someone gets ill or needs to and suddenly recuse themselves, we could be in a situation. So that's why it's coming up.
Can I ask clarification too? Because Alex, what you said is you only can watch one meeting, right? So you only can really miss one meeting.
Oh, electronically, yes.
So it's only one electronic meeting. That's, I think, one of the issues. And then I think that issue, like there, I mean, that started before I became a member, and so, and it was voted in December, right? So that was a long period of time where the other 4 members had to be present for many, many meetings. And we could, this year, nobody filed right before, but we could be in situations like that again.
Right.
That something potentially could take a long time if it's.
And it's not to suggest that any of us are looking to skip meetings. I think
No,
we sign up with the commitment that we're going to do 26 meetings a year or more, but things happen.
Right.
People get ill.
The logistics, when I started, the Hendry's building, and I didn't vote in that, and 4 members decided on that. In the discussion that happened previously on this additional member was some of the people that had been around for quite a while, Alex obviously included, said that they didn't, over the course of years, never ran into a significant problem relative to that. Then there's the logistics of the alternate. Does somebody show up at
Pointed
every
out.
meeting? And I don't believe they should be able to have a say at the table if they're not elected by the town, the same as everybody else here has been. So it gets very difficult for the alternate as well as using the alternate.
All right, well, this is,
I think the other thing we should do is ask the government study committee, because I think the report that the DOR did had a recommendation to add an alternate member to the planning board. That's where the original conversation
That's
came
when
up.
it came up before, and
That
that's
right,
when I believe, and Alex can correct me, but I believe that, again, I don't recall that we took an official vote, but I think the recommendation was that, no, the planning board wasn't in favor of the
I don't remember how they determined that they were going to recommend an alternate member over without asking the planning board. And that was not a good plan.
I think there's been a perception expressed, or I should say, an opinion expressed by some in the past, that it can take a long time to get things through, because if there is a situation where you end up having to cancel a meeting because you don't have the adequate 4 people there, that can be a disservice to the public in terms of being able to be efficient about how we do our business. So I think it's worth hearing that, or at least researching what's in the report as to why, and getting a sense from the government study committee what their thoughts are too.
does the government study committee still meet regularly?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Shall we would entertain a motion to send
I
it to
mean,
them?
again, in my 4 years, we haven't had to shut down a meeting because of lack of attendance. I don't know if Alex can speak to that in your years of experience. Have you ever had to cancel a meeting just because we didn't have a...
Yeah, I remember that there are times that we continued a meeting because someone was not able to attend, but it didn't. It didn't. You know, there was no crisis of time that. I mean,
The crisis of time is pretty
usually, you know, you can.
Yeah, the crisis of time is pretty unusual.
Another question, sorry. Participation via phone, is that considered participation as if in person?
That's a good question.
Non-voting, right?
It's considered what?
Is that equal to participation in person? And
Yes,
so-
you can do that. I don't know. I think that you can do it by phone. Certainly you can do it by video. But I think you can do it actually by phone. And
I don't know if your vote counts, though.
What?
If you're on the phone, I don't think your vote counts.
I know on the warrant committee, we had to have roll call votes when
Really?
people were on the phone. So you had to state your, but we did have votes on the warrant committee.
all right, this is the first big test for April,
Well, good thing I have this trusty binder here to guide me.
and up to date one. Everyone else has
exactly.
has stuff that was.
Those are a bit compromised.
I don't think the zoning act has changed since those binders got made, so I wouldn't worry too much.
So
I
my
don't-
question
I
would
don't
be-
have the electronic in my copy of the zoning act. I don't think. Maybe I do. Where is it?
I thought it would be in the open meeting guide about remote
Yeah.
participation.
There was that was a fairly recent change in the
Right.
law, I
We
think.
looked into, we did it. We did it this summer when I was down in Cape, so.
Question is, did we
We
vote?
did look into it. I don't recall if we had a vote that evening, though.
I do know on the warrant committee, we did have votes where people participated by phone, and it had to be a roll call vote.
And they voted.
They voted,
And
so
if we determined that that was wrong, we're going to have to
back to the
redo all
warrant
those
committee.
things.
a couple of years ago, things could have changed in the law, I don't know.
But in any event, this is,
So yes, you can do it by a roll call vote, under certain circumstances, illness,
There,
personal disability, emergency, geographic distance,
geographic
military
distance, yeah, there were
service.
specific reasons.
Yeah, okay.
So I guess my question on this would be, who would want to be an alternate member? I mean,
That's a
especially
topic
if
that
you
came up
have
the
to
first go
come,
around. That's a
which
topic.
would make me feel a little more comfortable if somebody was going to be here.
Well, they definitely have to come. That's
But no, I
part of
mean,
it.
consistently.
Right, they'd have to be at every meeting.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. I know I wouldn't be interested in that, to come to every meeting and then not have a voice.
I mean,
in the
I-
discussion.
I wouldn't be interested in being an alternate.
That was the
Wouldn't
first
That's
go around that
another
we had.
crux.
We went through this exactly what we're talking about, the logistics of getting somebody who would be here without being able to participate.
You'd end up billing it as someone who wants to run in the future that wanted to try it out or something along those lines. But
Yeah.
I agree, it's going to be a tall order to find
I mean,
somebody
that
to sit
said,
here.
I would be interested to know if there are other towns that do this and under what circumstances and how they do it. And that might be a great task for a government study. I don't know if they get into that level of detail, but
Government Study Committee talked to a few towns, and they, of course, said this is just the greatest thing that's ever happened to us.
oh, it is. Oh, okay. Well,
Well, those are the towns they chose to speak to.
Well, that's what they would say to the Government Study Committee, obviously.
Right. I guess I look for direction here. Do we kick it to government study? Do we want to further discuss it amongst ourselves? Are we done with it? Do we not want to talk about it anymore at all?
Well, I agree with April. I think it'd be useful to have some information about what other towns have done it and why, and if it's worked. And then also just at least get the government study committee to send an email, or if they want to come in person and give us their thoughts about it and when they did look into it. And then
Well,
we can discuss it.
I guess
and
my
make a
question is,
decision.
should government study be looking at those first issues, or is that something that we should?
Well, I
be
think
doing?
this-
I'm not sure we necessarily have to be leading the charge on this.
That's where it initiated originally a couple of years ago from the government side.
Right.
And they recommended that it
That it
be in
happens.
place.
Okay.
But they didn't suggest all the logistics.
Right.
I mean, another proposal might be to reach out to DOR. And maybe somebody on our team can do it, or government study, and just find out why they recommended that, who else is doing it, and what, do they consider that a best practice? or-
Why don't, Tim, could we can we find whatever came forward last time and just distribute it to the board, and we'll talk about it on, looks like May 26th is the next
I
time this
think
is on the
Hingham
list.
has it, and you could, if you have a relationship with the town planner there, you might do a little spade work into this yourself.
I don't yet, but I'm a people person.
Or
so-
you could get the town planner to, but it would be useful. As I say, I think the government study committee identified a few towns that have such a member, but you know, I think the question of who would serve and would the convenience of being able to rush forward rather than continue it for a week or whatever be
Worth it.
worth it. And if I mean, if we didn't like the candidates, could we say, sorry, we're not going to appoint anyone? We want a new,
We want a new slate.
we want a new slate.
All right, all good questions. Tim will bring us something to further this conversation on the 26th. The rest of the agenda for tonight was really just to, for this piece, was just to look at this schedule and give any comments if you have any, although it is quite straightforward. and it was, certainly is not meant to be carved in stone. We can modify it as we go. And then from a drafting standpoint, does anybody, where are we with signage?
Well,
We
I
have to
mean,
start from scratch?
drafting something without knowing what the board wants. I mean, do people want Milton to be a village, a English village with wooden carved signs illuminated by steady
Snack, right.
white light shining on them, even though the places that we would be putting these signs are not very village-like. I mean, to make East Milton into a village is going to be a tough one.
But I do think, Alex,
Rosendale into a village.
What?
That's
He made
true.
Rosendale into a village.
my recollection is that there was a citizens petition regarding signage, and people were very unhappy about the Sleepy sign and about some gas station signs, and that's what prompted people to put together that citizens petition. And I recall people also coming, to express their concerns, and they said, okay, we will be willing to accept the fact that this wouldn't be voted at town meeting, that it would get further study. And I think it's been some time since that. I think I've said this in the past, that the things that we ought to pay most attention to are the ones that seem to have the most interest from members of the community, and that's one that people have. So East Milton, I think, has been the one that feels as if the signs are out of scale. So that seems to me we have to look at scale. And we have to look at the illumination, because that's the other thing that's been an issue. Are they LED, and are they flashing, are they not, and things of that nature. And then we also know that our building official has suggested that signs for businesses that are non-conforming pre-existing and outside of the business districts be treated in a similar fashion as those businesses that are in the business districts, because they're prohibited now. So I think if we take the few things we've already heard as our starting point, and then overlay that on the new law, I guess, which you've
But
talked about.
What have we learned? We've learned that people have an issue with certain signs in East Milton. But have we figured out, I mean, before we write anything, we have to know what sort of signage the board thinks would be good for East Milton.
We did have
And what sort of illumination? I mean, I don't think we've, as a board, have ever really, we've talked about it, but we haven't concluded.
That's absolutely true. We did do that visual preference study with the public last summer, and I think we could pull that out, right? And we
So
could
the
look
board
at
could
that.
actually discuss those results.
mean, I do
That would
think-
be a great starting point.
It would be a good
I'd love to
starting
see
point,
that.
yeah.
I think at the last meeting we talked about, because I know one of the issues that came up was before even getting into the substantive content of a sign bylaw, what is the process of sign approval? Because it's a little bit all over the place right now. And I think that May 26th was pegged as maybe inviting the Board of Selectmen, the building inspector, and the sign review committee to have a sort of roundtable discussion of, who wants signs and how is the process going to be laid out. And given that, I think the second meeting that's sort of earmarked for signs might be a good opportunity to invite some of those signatories of that citizens petition last year, and then that can sort of be a discussion of, scale, illumination. We can bring out the results of the survey and kind of see, throw those back up against the wall.
Well, just to be clear, that would be the second of 2 meetings. So that will put us in a position where we will not probably have much time to discuss language. So I just want to be realistic with the schedule here. I think if we were going to talk about signs and I think it's a great idea to talk about the process with the Board of Selectmen and the Sign Review Committee, it may also make sense that same evening to pull out the visual preference survey and have a conversation amongst the boards about what we are looking for. Because then we can have something to start, to Alex's point, to start drafting towards. Because if we wait until July 14th to start drafting, we will not have anything for October. And that might be fine. That might not be a problem, but that's probably the reality. So if we're targeting October, I think we probably need to get the board's preferences, boards plural, preferences plural, as to the visual preference survey, and have some conversations about that, so we have something to work to under drafting.
It has to process, because it may be that the board, I mean, I personally think that if you have a good sign committee, you can give them a lot of discretion. And that the process basically is more important than trying to specify what the signs should look like, and saying that you can only use whatever kind of, I don't know.
Well,
it just seems.
But to that point, whatever kind of light, the light changes over the 3 to 5 to 10 years, and if you give the sign review committee the discretion to perhaps change the design review by the guidelines, is what you'd probably call them in that case. One of the better towns I've worked in from the town side of the table, not necessarily the applicant side of the table, is Wellesley. And that's done by design review committee, and the planning board is basically approved sign, but with the recommendation of design review, and they don't ever approve it without recommendation of sign review, so it gives all of the discretion of sign review.
We have a sign review committee.
I know we do.
But they have no
guidelines,
authority.
and they have no authority.
They've been, apparently, their recommendations hasn't always been followed.
That's correct.
Well, and the other thing is, we have a bylaw that allows discretion by the Board of Selectmen, which is the route that most people end up going. And then you have a sign review committee that makes recommendations to the Board of Selectmen, but then the Board of Selectmen's been asking planning board member to attend their meetings regarding signage. It's
Well, that's because we told them they had to.
But I don't think that process is a good process.
It wasn't intended to be permanent.
And I do think that it would be much clearer to at least have some regulations on the signage that can demonstrate the intent of what we'd like to see. And there still would always be the option, but that shouldn't be the first place to go, is to the option. The first place ought to be that we have a pretty clear understanding of what we want to do. And I think the sign review committee probably would like to have a little bit better set of standards too. So I would like to hear from them. And I would like to hear from the Board of Selectmen. I think earlier in the process, the better to hear from them.
I agree exactly what you basically said. We should have some kind of basis in the bylaw.
Yeah.
But the sign review committee, even if the sign comes forward, either way, they should have some review on the sign.
I agree.
Yeah, oh,
Whether
absolutely.
it's like,
Yeah, I agree.
approval not required, but they still should have, an opportunity to review it before it's erected.
When we have our process, when we start discussing process, we've got the sign review committee, and we've got the selectmen, and we've got the planning board, all sitting around this very table, saying, well, what should the process be? I think that we'd better have our staff come up with just some points on process that we could discuss in advance of our meeting to see if we can be a little, to help this, to facilitate this discussion. It seems to me that we need to do some pre-work, because if we just go in and say we're going to now discuss process,
Well,
It'll be a long meeting.
well, no, it would be, we'd say, well, you've got to do this, you've got to do that, and but we wouldn't do it.
one of the things, though, I think that would be beneficial, and maybe then Tim or Bill can make some phone calls to the Board of Selectmen and to the sign review committee, just to get their sense of what's working or not working well for them. So they're the ones who do this now, so I think they have a better idea than we do in terms of how things could be improved.
Is the
in
sign
terms of
review
process.
committee, as it stands now, are they willing to take on the responsibility of deciding what's acceptable or not? I mean, presently, I guess they're participating a lot, making recommendations, but
I think they'd probably be more willing to participate if their recommendations were heard.
do you think their participation would be more attentive if they were going to make the decision?
But it's so convenient to have the selectmen do it, rather than an appointed board, because of the fact that the buck does stop somewhere, and
I agree with that.
So I mean, I don't see any reason to take the selectmen out of the process. I just think that the process has to be, the sign review committee has to get a recommendation to the selectmen, which has some force. And I don't think that many of the decisions by the sign review committee are upset by the selectmen. It's only the hot button ones.
Okay. Why don't we, for May 12th, Tim, I'm happy to work on this with you. Why don't we get some process recommendations and also bring to the table for planning board the visual preference survey in advance so that we all can at least have a preliminary discussion prior to the May 26th meeting. So that will be for signs for May 12th. For the planning board alternate member, we're going to have the DOR Town Study Committee report that we will get in advance of that May 12th meeting. We can have another quick conversation about that and see if anybody has any further thoughts about where to go with that, if anywhere. And Tim will attempt to talk to a couple of towns and see what their experiences have been. I would like to defer the conversation, as was recommended here, on sort of the general discussion of nonconforming and bed and breakfast until May 12th. Just to sort of start that conversation.
Just on the schedule that's been set up, and it's my thought, but I'm willing to listen, that maybe it doesn't make sense for one reason or another, but it would seem to me that we should prioritize what's most significant. And I agree with Cheryl when she says that we hear voices from the town. That should be the citizens. That should be the most significant articles that we attack, but the bylaws that we attack. But I think we should stay on one until we're done. Only because with the delay between it, you're revisiting things that you've already spoke about. When you leave a large period of time, you get to this far, and then you step back and start again. It just takes more time. And I'd rather see 2, 3 bylaws go forward rather than 4 that aren't fully vetted. I'd rather see
I think that's
something fully vetted, and
a great point.
that's what we like.
Yep.
Let's go with it.
I think it's a great point.
And if we don't get to something, we prioritized.
So I think it's a great point, Mike. I think, the way it's drafted right now, it's not necessarily the order of the bullets that I have under May 12th, but certainly signs, and I threw alternate amendment member in there just because I thought it was the easiest place to have 2 conversations. But signs would be the first priority, based on the fact that it's first. And then Tim just put non-conforming and bed and breakfast. I don't know that there's a priority over one or the other, but to your point, those should probably move down if we're not done with signs yet, and we'll continue with signs. I think that's appropriate.
It seems to me to stay on
And
topic.
that's what I
is a
mean.
lot
I
easier.
think when I started, if I didn't say it, I meant this is meant to be a fluid schedule.
Yeah, no, and I
change. So
thought there might be
that's a
some
great point.
thought behind it that I was willing to hear that probably didn't
I
add
think
logic
that
to
makes
my
a lot of
thoughts.
sense to get one done.
Brian, when is the master plan implementation committee going to put forward some recommendations?
Well, Cheryl, would you like to report on that as the chair of that committee?
The reason why I ask is because there might be something that comes out of that
Right.
discussion that we see as a bigger priority
true.
than these.
Right. I had some notes I wanted to distribute at some point when we're ready, and master plan implementation is on these set of notes I was thinking about. Just sort of thinking ahead for the next year, some things that might help guide us. But we had a meeting, so like a month and a half ago now. We tried to get a meeting before the election, but it was a little bit difficult to get, so we're trying to get our second meeting in the coming weeks. The first meeting, the charge of the members was to take, I think there were 7 goals, Tim?
Yeah.
That were in the master plan. And then each goal had implementation strategies, and it assigned sort of short-term ones, longer-term ones, and who would be most likely to take the charge on seeing those come through. So what we said was that each member would take a couple of the goals and put a one-pager together, because the master plan is a thick document. There's a lot of information in it. But for discussion purposes, we could say, okay, these are the topics, these are the goals, these are the relative timeframes, and we really are to be the ones who are checking in with the ones who are responsible. So we want to kind of give a framework and a time frame for people to be able to report back. So we would say then, come to the planning board and say, okay, here's the things the planning board is to lead the charge on. So planning board, report back to us, the master plan committee, implementation committee, what's your process and schedule for addressing these? Because we're not responsible for addressing them on the implementation committee. We're responsible to make sure that all the appropriate parties address them. So some of it's Parks and Rec, some of it's Board of Selectmen, some of it's Planning Board. So I do think that probably coming out of our next meeting, we'll be talking about that framework, coming back to us. So I'm going to guess in May or June that should be coming to the Planning Board.
And do you have a sense for whether any of that involves zoning?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean they,
Cheryl, why
they're-
don't you give out your notes now? I mean,
Okay.
it makes sense. We're in the conversation.
I'm just thinking of time frame. If we're building up a schedule to September, and there's things that might come up that we might think are more important than some of these other issues, we might need to placeholder, or we might need to make everybody aware that those issues wouldn't come up until next
Right.
October.
And
Well,
which
April,
is fine,
just for your
too.
background, this is meant to be as I said already, a rough, kind of loose
Yeah.
schedule, because what was happening is the board was, by the time you get to a certain point in the evening, unless it's on the agenda, it's pretty easy to just
Yeah.
move it on. So,
And I
so
think
this
this
is going to
is-
keep us at least focused on zoning
Right.
at each meeting.
well,
Can I-
the things that
Right,
if I
another
just,
question.
sorry Tim, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to address Mike's point, which I think is a good one and would probably lead to a good outcome. But the thinking behind this was, one of the pieces of feedback that we got last summer was, the workshops that the board held, they were publicized, but it was, they were sort of outside of the normal schedule, and it was, the summertime and people sort of don't know. The virtue of this would be that, on May 2nd or May 12th, whenever the schedule gets finalized, that on this day and this day, the board's going to be talking about signs, and then there's going to be another event then. So if that's something that you're interested in, you can, schedule accordingly. So as far in advance as possible to give people an indication that this is what the board's going to be doing. Because there's been a lot of discussion of well, we weren't aware of this and I didn't hear about this. So the firmer it is earlier, the better the word can spread and people will know, oh, August 11th we're going to be talking about bed and breakfast and then there's going to be an event. I'd better not go to the Aruba that week.
Just want to make a quick point on the communication before we go back to you, Cheryl. I think over the last couple of months, be it warrant committee, planning board, the Ice House community meetings, that there have been a number of events on multiple board levels, even Board of Selectmen to a certain extent, where communicating and public outreach and making sure that people know what's going on has been raised over and over and over and over and over again. So this is not an issue that's isolated to planning board. And it's something that we need to discuss sort of amidst the different boards through hopefully the staff and try to figure out some things. I think Cheryl has some good ideas on here and we've had this conversation before. But I just want to make clear that the planning board is a part of the body that's having this outreach problem, but it's not isolated to us by any stretch.
But we are televised, and
We are televised.
if we discuss these things during our meetings, and there's citizen speak available for people to come to the next meeting and speak, it probably is going to reach further than having a forum that is not televised. In other words, I see a more advantage to incorporating these discussions into our meetings rather than say come and listen to what we're going to say about something and then maybe 30 people show up, but the audience is probably in excess of that. So I just think that we should scrap the forums and do it at our meetings.
So I think this is all feeding into what I was asking about, which is when are we going to learn what the master plan implementation committee is recommending, and then when are we committing to taking that up? Because I'm concerned about us talking about these sets of issues now for October, and then having a separate presentation from the implementation committee that might talk about a whole set of other issues, and just people watching might not understand when we're planning to take up what, and I think that creates a lot of confusion because there's a lot of things going on.
Yeah.
So I don't think we can answer that today. It doesn't sound, but it would be good if we could try to get our arms around that soon, and maybe what's happening in this implementation committee is a 2017 issue.
Yeah, I mean, all of these may be 2017 issues.
true,
We may
that's
get
true.
to
I can tell you
July
that
and say, we're not getting any of this
Right.
this year.
all of these non-conforming business uses, bed and breakfast signs, they're all in the master plan as things that
Well,
need to
I
be
thi-
addressed.
I think there's something that's
Different
being-
levels of priorities perhaps, but they're in there.
I think an obvious statement is, there's not a great disconnect between the master plan and what we've been taking up
Right.
regularly.
Right.
We
That's right.
participated in selecting the people that put together the master plan. We participated in some of the forums, or as a board or as members of the board. I mean, it's not a total,
There's
they're
not a
over there, do
separate
over there,
set.
and we're
Okay.
over here doing this.
Well, that's good to know.
It's
Yeah.
been-
And and we all went through it in detail last summer when Alex provided his last set
And I,
of.
of course, bring the master plan to the meetings with me.
There you go.
But there,
Brian says it's on his.
my computer.
On his computer.
Oh, he says that all the
I can
time.
point to this all the time. It's big memory.
But
Everything's in there.
One thing about the master plan, just if we get our $15,000 now that we've solved the zoning bylaw issue, it seems to me that getting some hard copies of the master plan with that money, with part of that money, would be a really good thing to do because, you know, my
Right.
copy of the master plan is what I used, and then I have the changes written on it, but I haven't, it's too difficult to print.
excellent
Yes.
point, and I think we should have copies made and put in the library as well.
I agree with
Well,
that 100%.
the ones in the library could be of everything. I don't personally want a copy of everything.
Well,
But
they
we could
should,
print
all 3 volumes, actually, it's a lot of paper, but I think the library would be a great place for the
I
3
agree
volumes,
for
and
the
they can
3
be
volumes.
separate.
I just want volume 1.
Yeah. Oh, and you're talking about what
Yeah.
you want, yeah. But I think for the public to, even for us to navigate reading it, an electronic copy, it's cumbersome, you can't flip back and forth. So I do think printed copies is a great idea.
Sure.
I think on the, in looking at the master plan and also looking at the housing production plan recently, I've been listening to the debates that preparing for the last election, and I, see what some of the people's concerns and confusions are even. Like there was a question, I think, on the Council on Aging debate about why is the planning board talking about certain issues? Why isn't it the Board of Selectmen or someone else? And I actually do think there perhaps is a little bit of confusion about what comes to us and how we address things. So I didn't put it on here, but I almost think like a little zoning 101 on the website could be an interesting thing too. What does the Board of Appeal do? When does it go to the Board of Appeal? What does the planning board do? What does the planning board initiate versus what is the planning board responsible to react to when it's submitted to the town? It doesn't have to be legal language, because I think that's what's on. It's already there, and it's hard for people to understand. But I do think that could be useful for people. And then, on the communication outreach, I think some of my thoughts that I've expressed before, and I decided to put everything on one page here as a reminder, really, for myself. But I think these are the things, as Brian said, consistently sort of heard about is, and as I said, we have something on the agenda every week that says zoning. But if I'm a member of the community, am I going to have to go to every meeting to figure out what's going to be talked about under zoning? I mean, it's not a reasonable way to try and anticipate when you want to attend a meeting. And, some people might attend a meeting and it not be the topic. They spent 2 or 3 hours there, and they're probably not likely to come to the next one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why we're doing this.
Right.
And the reason we put zoning on the agenda was so that we would get to
Could
this
do it,
point.
yeah.
So I think we've been taking baby steps, and we're continuing to
And one of the other things
expand our efforts.
I just put here because I think that I do work in Boston a fair amount in the neighborhoods, and you know, that the neighborhood associations host meetings on a regular basis, and they invite project proponents to come present to the neighborhood association. And it's not sponsored, it's not a public meeting sponsored by the agency that's responsible for approval, but the agency does take into consideration what that association's views are based on that presentation. So I think that might be something that we consider suggesting to project proponents of large-scale projects. I'm not sure it's reasonable for small scale. And then the other thing that they have, which I think is their online presence is really strong, in that they have all the projects in the status of their review. So if they've been filed, where they are in the process, and you can search them by that, you can search them by neighborhood, you can search them by address, and you can download the application. So as a member of the public, the information is pretty easy to get. And I think as we think about, I know a lot of people have talked about the town's website, and that's really not just us, this board, but if we can have input into the other into the town administrator or whoever's budget improving the website is going to come from, I think it would be useful to think about the planning board in terms of the interest the public has in some of the things that we review, particularly new zoning.
That brings up a larger point. I mean, a lot of the things we're talking about here cost money, whether it's staff or outsourcing or whatever. You know, typically the planning board, I think, at least in the last couple of years, has really not discussed our budget until we absolutely had to at the last minute. You know, we probably, if there are things we want to look at as we approach potentially an override year or not, there are things that we should probably start getting ready to put onto a contingent budget as one-time costs. So, you know, as I look down your list here, these are all good things to talk about. I don't know if we want to talk about them tonight, but we probably should, much like we have zoning on our list, at some point we probably should add budget to our list, and it should be long before it's due, because I think, you know, we need to understand how we're going to get all of these things done. They're great ideas, but they're, you know, we have two staff, three or four staff people, and
I think that's why I advocated for having a line item in the budget,
Yep.
which we have, so that we can address things that we think would be improvements that we didn't necessarily have something specific in mind at the time. I know that there might have been some concern about that, and we did then say it was going to be this, which Tim has done. So now I think we do have, again, some funds available.
Yep.
I just want to touch real quick on the other two things on here, though, Brian, if I may. The housing production plan. I think because, you know, there are ties between the master plan and the housing production plan, between the Board of Selectmen's role in that and our role in that. There's a little bit of reprieve in the fact that that's been adopted and accepted, but we do have to begin to make progress on it. And there are recommendations about process that I think are useful to look at. And there are also recommendations for zoning that I think we should look at. So as again, I was thinking our look ahead, you know, what we're going to tackle. I think we all might want to take a look at certain sections of that, and I can highlight those sections in an email to Tim if you like. I didn't put them here. And then for me, on the subdivision rules and regs, I began to think about this with some of our applications where they're looking for waivers for things like sidewalks, the width of the street, curbs, etc. And then also the DPW stormwater presentation on the EPA MS4. And in that presentation, there's a control measure number 5, which really is a planning issue, which is new development and redevelopment. And they recommend evaluating zoning and stormwater bylaws. So one of the things I think that we could think about with that in these, if we take a look at both of these, is that we could consider low impact development standards, where we could look at we could look at roadway width and try and minimize it so that we could decrease how much impervious cover we have. Same thing for dimensions of cul-de-sacs, our parking requirements. And then we have a lot of structured stormwater. Can we start looking at bioswales and rain gardens, pervious pavement instead of impervious pavement, requirements for shade cover and trees? So that's a whole another set of things, but I do think this is the business of what we review on a regular basis, and rather than grant waivers periodically, I think we might want to think about some improvements there. And so that may be a place to target some funds, you know, some analysis from somebody whose expertise. We would have to obviously coordinate with DPW on the stormwater. And then lastly, I had that I do think we ought to work with our building official, who's our zoning compliance officer, on the things that he's coming up with on a regular basis, and he's suggested that we talk to him about.
Okay.
So that could take
Lots to
2
think
years.
about. Luckily, the master plan is, I believe, a 10-year document, so we should be.
But I do think when we talk about prioritizing and what we want to look at, I do think, I mean, I threw these out as
Thank you
some
for
things
doing
to
this.
think
This is
about.
helpful.
But I would like for us to come back at a next meeting or a coming meeting and say, okay, we have all of these things. Can we agree, let's start to prioritize these things that we think are important, that we've heard from the community that are important? Or even if we put some of it out to the community for some sense, or from other boards like the Board of Selectmen, what things that they would like us
Well,
to
this is,
prioritize.
you now have in front of you a first draft of a schedule and Cheryl's ideas for where we should be thinking over the next several years. So it would be great if on May 12th we could have some opinions from the board as to where we should be spending our time. So thank
And
you.
I think that, just on non-conforming uses, to throw something out, my view is that the proposal to allow more business development and residential development on one of these sites is what's known as a planned unit development. And the Zoning Act says that in order to have a planned unit development, you need 60,000 square feet, or in a C-zone, 35,500 or 37,500, 5 times the zoning district. And you get something like the KFC Hall, which is not going to, you're not going to get that minimum area to do something with the KFC Hall. And I think that it is the most blighted of structures in our town, and that doing something about it is important. And there is a provision in the Zoning Act that I think would allow something less than general. General, you can do this, you can increase the density. I mean, it says you can do specific things. But if you're talking specific things, you're going to be talking zoning, which impacts the KFC site. So I do think that we have to bear in mind that there is this requirement in the Zoning Act, and if it is applicable, as I am convinced it is, if you need 60,000 square feet, except in the C-zone, that is something to be considered, because that's a lot of land. Mm-hmm. And even in the C-zone, where it's 5 times the minimum lot size, or 37.5, that's almost an acre. That's almost a builder's acre.
Right.
So it's a big site, and a lot of these sites are non-expandable into that sort of a thing. And so thinking about something less is something that we should do. And don't forget that we have this this bylaw out there that has been suggested. We have noise, and we have institutional lighting. Institutional uses have been brought up by people, and we should definitely talk about them and see if what we think would be reasonable with respect to them. We have this, you remember that Ned and Bob Sheffield came in a year ago and said, we need some change zoning so that people who want to expand non-conforming houses on small lots can do so. And it got all morphed out of shape and collapsed as a as a project, but I do think that we should attempt to bring it back to life and make sure that we identify what the issue is, what the issue that needs to be addressed is, and then deal with it, and not try and deal with all the issues in town all at once, which is basically what happened to the last bylaw.
Okay, I think, fair enough. And
So you were saying these items should come into the mix as far as the priority?
I think on the non-conforming residential, that's a place that Joe Prondak could be helpful, because he's the one who reviews the applications and sends people off to the Board of Appeal regularly for things that are non-conforming.
I think that
Yeah, so
seems to be a priority item.
I think there is some definitely frustration amongst people in town, because going to the Board of Appeal on a dimensional variance on something that's pre-existing non-conforming, if you have one abutter or two that you're not friendly with, then the Board of Appeal, may find that the abutter, would be aggrieved and not grant the variance. And it makes improving a property difficult, And so I do think it's definitely worth talking to the Board of Appeal and to the Joe Prondak about on the non-conforming residential.
And I thought we had a perfectly good bylaw designed when everything else began
Now,
being heaped on top of it.
I can tell you that I've heard attorneys say that they feel as if our zoning official misreading the bylaw on that. So that's why I say I think it's worth some conversations, because, for example, I am aware of someone who, because of the way that land slopes and the way first floor is defined, and therefore whether you have 2.5 stories, you cannot expand that property in any manner without getting a variance, because it already is non-conforming.
It's my house.
Yeah, so there's lots of houses like that in Milton. There's lots of things like that that people would be very surprised about until they want to go do something with their home. And I think that's something where that affects probably the more people in town than many other things that we would consider.
And we just did something about that. We increased the
But the height's only
The
one
height.
example. I mean, there's
But
setbacks.
I mean, if
Yeah.
we get these things, we can
Yeah.
address them, as long as we are not trying to address everything.
But
That's bad.
but if you're the resident, Alex, the frustration is, okay, you took care of my height problem, but now I still have another problem that's pre-existing non-conforming, and there's lots of them.
And-
I think that's where we need the list and we need the information, and maybe we need some discussion with how it's being enforced, whether it's being enforced properly or not. And that's something I think that if we go back to our emails that we received, I'm thinking from Marion McKettrick on one, and but I don't want to call Marion out in case it wasn't her. But there were comments from attorneys in town that perhaps this should be discussed, because maybe the problem isn't so much the language of the zoning as is how it's being enforced.
The
Well,
zoning,
Throw it out there.
Let's identify the problems and solve them.
the zoning board of appeals
I
would be a
like
good
that
body to go to say, is this a regular situation that you're running into? Again, just to fix a problem that exists.
And just in time,
just in
Brian.
time.
Can I just say one thing in defense of, or just to put out there in terms of, did you?
Yes, I'm sorry.
To Alex's point about doing the business here at the planning board, nixing the workshops. The thought behind scheduling those workshops is sort of similar to what was done last summer, except very, very focused on one single issue, which would it wouldn't necessitate the entire board being there. We could be very flexible about where and when. The virtue I thought in that was the potential to, schedule those on different days, on different times, perhaps even a Saturday. A different venue, to sort of give the broadest possible opportunity for people to participate. It could be that someone, works the late shift every second and third Thursday and just can never come to a planning board meeting. So just that one opportunity to sort of get out there and sort of give a little bit of a different flavor to the discussion. But Alex's points are well taken, that, these meetings are televised, and my email and phone number are on the website, and I'm happy to receive any comments on zoning or anything else, anytime
Anything else?
between 8:30 and
The long one,
4:45 on a weekday. So, I mean, that was just the thinking of scheduling that type of thing. So
But the
you can-
forum still would be planning board meetings, and the advantage of the planning board meeting is that it's televised.
We can,
There's-
I mean, we televised those meetings last summer. I mean, that's never been an impediment.
There's a, and I won't belabor this, but there's a bigger issue here and I've gone to some of these forums and meetings, and you see a core group of people that show up for everything, whether it's non-conforming business or signs. The vast majority of people out there are not going to show up to these things until you put a sign next to their house, and somebody builds a supermarket next to their house. The vast majority of them just ain't going to participate. I think it's a matter of time and a lot of things. But I guess that's why we have elected officials, to try to help decide. And just because there's a vocal group in town or vocal groups doesn't mean that we don't try to understand and protect even the people that don't come and speak. Because sometimes they just don't have the time or the resources to come into all these meetings. But I'd like to see any bylaw discussion. I've said it all along. I think we should be doing it here. I don't even think we should be sending planning board members home to do it. It should be done here, where it's in public and we can hash things out as a group.
I couldn't agree more at this point. So, let's continue the dialogue on how we're going to move this forward. Let's all go home and hopefully think about what we talked about. Let's think about where our priorities should be. Look back at some of our notes from some of our earlier discussions, and we'll spend a fair amount of time on May 12th. Continuing this conversation and specifically talking about the merits of even attempting to do a non-conforming or a bed and breakfast or a sign or alternate member, noise, whatever it might be. So I'm going to move on back to new business now with Mr. Corcoran for 245 Highland Street, and we will end the evening talking about our town meeting presentation to the extent we will have one. Mr. Corcoran, welcome.
Thank you, and appreciate your indulging me while I was across the street with the selectmen, and congratulations to you, April, and
Thanks.
welcome to the planning board. I look forward to working with you often in the future, and congratulations, Mr. Chairman, on being, apparently haven't been reelected to.
Oh, no, we're not doing that until after town meeting.
So, 245 Highland Street, it's owned by Dennis and Martha Burke. It's about 7.5 acres of property. It's right at the crown of Highland. As you come up Highland Street from the hospital, it's on the right-hand side, just before you come down and meet up with Fletcher Steel Way. We were here a month ago and we presented a basic subdivision, 6 lots, 2 larger lots in the rear and 4 lots to the front with a relocated proposed main roadway in a cul-de-sac that would have kind of blown up the land in front, would have eliminated both sides, trees on both sides of the existing driveway, and a lot of other treed areas. And the question was asked, I think Emily asked it, whether we had considered the option of pursuing a cluster development as an alternative to subdivision. And quite frankly, I hadn't. And was forced to in the process of evaluating redevelopment opportunities for the Carberry property, and having read through the bylaw and taking a second look at it here, it was clear that it might be advantageous. It allows you to identify a unit count based on a modified subdivision. So the unit count, in this case, if you apply a subdivision standard with lots that are 30,000 square feet as opposed to 40,000 square feet in a Residence A zone, with 125 feet of frontage on a road as opposed to 150, determine what type of, how you could develop that subdivision, and from there, that gives you a unit count. So the property can handle 8 of those lots. There's a bonus allocation in the bylaw that allows an additional unit if the lot contains at least 325,000 square feet. This is almost twice that, so there would be eligibility for a ninth. So we started looking at that. There is a provision that requires a payment into the Affordable Housing Trust in order to take advantage of this, and so we've considered that. We haven't begun to think about what the value of that payment might be, but it's certainly a subject to be addressed. And the simple question really came down to if we put together a plan and it was acceptable to both the Burkes and to their neighbors, is it something that the planning board would be interested in our pursuing? The Burkes met with the abutters a couple of nights ago and showed them a nine lot cluster. Essentially, the way the cluster works is, having determined the number of units that you're allowed to have, you can then cluster single-family lots that are a minimum of 10,000 square feet with a lot coverage maximum of 35%. You have to retain 35% of the property as open land. And then you can conform, you can cluster the lots however you deem fit. There are no setback requirements. There's a height limitation, but there's other requirements that are available under zoning go away with respect to this. So 9 lots was one too many from the perspective of the neighbors. They were concerned about impact on value, and so we've arrived at an 8-lot subdivision, and I've got a plan that's sort of a cartoon of that.
Is that the one that we received?
Should be the same, but did you send it?
I printed them in black and white, so you got my pink highlighter.
Yeah. Do you happen to have, Ned or Tim, the version that was brought in before? The
Yes.
site plan version? I don't have mine, yeah.
If I have it in a folder from the last meeting.
You want to put it up on the screen?
That would be helpful.
So this is it.
Ned, when were you in for the preliminary? Is it the 10th?
I think it was April 10th.
Yes. Thank you.
So that showed, yeah, that's the subdivision plan. So
There we go.
Okay.
we had a main road coming straight in the middle. We'd relocate the driveway, move it, and that plan lower the main site driveways further up. With the smaller lot configurations that you get from the cluster, you can put 2 lots to the right-hand side of existing driveway and maintain that existing driveway. We think we'll need to widen it because it's not wide enough to handle, fire trucks or two-way traffic, but we don't need to relocate it, and we simply would need to widen the opening in the wall as opposed to relocate the wall. The trees that exist on when we widen, we'll have to widen to one side or the other, and one line of trees will have to go. But we can save one line of those trees. because we're dealing with an existing roadway, and it's an existing location, we think that it's a far simpler approach to stormwater management. We think we can install Cultex along the side of the roadway, as opposed to assemble Cultex. If you go to another,
Yeah.
if you remember the sheet, yeah, if you go to
There we go.
sheet 4 of 6, you can see those
grading
fairly
sheet.
large Cultex systems that get installed on the downhill side of the property towards the front right if you're standing on Highland Street. That chews up a fair amount of vegetation. There's some really healthy, mature, wooded areas on the property that ought to be preserved. And so what we can do is essentially build a band around the exterior of the property that achieves 35%, slightly more than 35% of the open land. I suppose it's possible to jigger those things a little bit, but we think that from a starting point, this is a cartoon that works. What we'd really like is to know whether the board sees this as a feasible alternative, and if so, we'd work on a more specific design that would be based substantially on this and then come back in before the board. The Burkes are anxious to move forward as quickly as they can. Their daughter is planning to take title to one of the lots and build a home, and would like to get going on that as soon as possible. So we would be back before the board as quickly as we could with and move forward with for the special permit. And so obviously one of the issues would be, are there any specific issues or concerns that would be identifiable that we should want to play with? We have on this new plan sort of located, I think, all of the significant trees. They had an arborist out to look at them, and I think Judith Kemp, who is a member of the Conservation Commission, who lives directly across the street, was also came out on site and helped identify a set of trees. So we've identified all of the significant trees. Would certainly want to preserve. Most of the wooded areas for preservation are around the perimeter of the property. In any event, those kind of call out to remain untouched, if you will. So as I said, this is really a cartoon to show that it's capable of being done. And we think it's in this case, it's an interesting, having looked at this pretty carefully, this is one of the properties in Milton where it's appropriate to apply the cluster bylaw. You can do it by special permit if it's between 5 and 10 acres. I think there's a right to do it if it's more than 10 acres. Obviously with a permit, but you need permission of the planning board if it's between 5 and 10 acres, and so we'd obviously be requesting that approval as part of this.
Board, Cheryl?
Well, I like that it can preserve the trees that we talked about when you were in before. And I think the neighbor who came in, whose property is in, if you're there on that upper right, would suffer less stormwater kind of runoff, at least from the initial, the trees that will remain, and that will help with the stormwater, I think. So, and then, the Highland Street being a scenic way, having that view, that vista down the street would be able to be maintained by keeping the drive in the same location. Stone wall, I think that's there, wouldn't be impacted. So I like that. And I like the fact that by keeping the drive, you can keep the trees, because I think what we've seen with Windmere is that by the work that I think the team did with trying to keep as many trees as possible, especially in the middle there, is beneficial. And I think so that would help here as well.
It's really an attractive view as you're driving on Highland Street and you're looking into the property. You look down that corridor of trees.
Right.
Unfortunately, they planted those trees over the years, and they planted them sort of up close to the existing driveway. And so one of those lines of trees probably has to go. I don't know whether it's possible to sort of meander the road, so you save some on one side and say at the front and others on the other side further to the back. You know, that would be a simple exercise in geometry to see if we could do that, but my
Well,
sense is we can't.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, you could take a look at the health of the trees too. I mean, these are like 12-inch and 6-inch identified here, whereas you're looking at here 48-inch deciduous trees. So I'm not sure if that means maple oak or whatever other it might be. But I think by virtue of keeping those being more significant than, let's say, the 6 to 12-inch that might be along the driveway. So the trade-off in terms of keeping the driveway where it is but having to widen it. And I think the approach of going to one side is probably reasonable. I don't know that you're going to have room to meander it.
Yeah. Probably not long enough.
Yeah. And then maybe you could look at that. What could that cul-de-sac minimum dimension be? think we
One of the
can
things that
look
we,
Careful with that. That can go both ways.
we do need to, one of the things we'll need to do is meet with fire chief and DPW, particularly with respect to the cul-de-sac for the fire chief's perspective. The cul-de-sac is what's drawn in the pink circle. The existing round driveway is there that serves the main house. And so the idea is that there would be 2 large lots to the back, and then smaller lots. They're each, I think, approximately 20 to 25,000 square feet.
So your cul-de-sac is not the design of a driveway that actually is in this cul-de-sac?
There
mean,
is an existing circular driveway that's right in front of the large house in the rear.
No, but if you look at your new cul-de-sac, it's got a number of intersecting driveways, and that's what you're proposing. I mean, don't get me wrong. As long as people can turn around, that's the important thing for a cul-de-sac. Actually, the cul-de-sac is the whole street, and the circle is the circle at the end of the cul-de-sac is what we're talking about.
So the circle at the end of the cul-de-sac would replace what is shown, that's an existing bituminous concrete driveway with spurs that go into that now go to the barn and/or to the existing two-story, the two-story building.
But it isn't necessarily a big round thing.
No, we just, for this purpose, it's just to show the exterior dimension.
All right.
Street view.
Anybody else?
I think that it's a good plan, personally, and I like the idea that there will be a contribution to the Affordable Housing Trust because they could use the dough.
I think this is a good view to look at.
I thought Ned said that they had to make a contribution if they were going to put in 9.
No.
It's
It could have an extra lot.
we actually could have 2 extra lots
Right.
if we chose to, because you get one for the fact that it exceeds 325,000 square feet, and you get one more if you want to do an affordable lot. I'm not sure there's much reason to do an affordable lot, but, so we'll do 8 and not 9 because the abutters are concerned about the perception of density with 9 lots. But if you take advantage of the bylaw, if you do fewer than 10 lots, you have to make a contribution to the Affordable Housing Trust. If you do 10 or more, then you do 10%.
But I don't see how you could fit another lot. I think the lots that you propose are good lots, and I don't see that you could possibly fit another lot in there without making some non-good lots.
Agreed.
Well, you actually can, the 9 lot,
Tearing a couple of buildings down.
the 9 lot
Well,
plan
you
actually
could
looked
tear
good.
it.
There was a 3rd lot on the right-hand side, so there were 3 smaller lots. What's interesting about the feel of this, I think, is that despite the fact that the lots themselves are smaller, each one is directly abutting a fair amount of that open land. That open land is gonna feel like it's yours. So you're still gonna have the sense of having a full acre lot without having the full acre.
Can I ask a question of the board? Have you permitted a cluster development project yet?
It's the first one.
Has there been a discussion about the parameters around this payment?
No.
We have another application in front of us on an informational basis. And on that, because with that particular proposal, we've asked for some guidance from the Affordable Housing Trust.
The new one underneath.
Yes.
I think the only precedence that I'm aware of for payment into the fund was that would have been 50,000 into the fund if 2 Adam Street was built.
Right, but that
14 new
was,
condominium
that was zoning, and here we have
That was a
an interest-
voluntary.
We have, yeah, a voluntary payment, but here we have an interesting problem in that, like the subdivision law, the cluster law actually produces lots. So, rather than houses. Although in doing a special permit, you can make provisions as to the houses. Any houses that are erected, but it doesn't require that houses be erected. So if you create an affordable lot, you're not creating anything that
Becomes a
anyone can
non-buildable
live in.
lot.
You're creating a lot in which somehow something would have to be built on it. So the value of an affordable lot has to be figured out too, but it isn't the same as the value of a lot with a house on it. And beyond that, of course, you don't have 100% because you only have 8 lots, so you're talking 80% value. So it will take some. It'll take some thought.
The language of the bylaw is, in a cluster development containing 10 or more lots, 10% of the lots surrounded to the nearest whole number shall be suitably restricted, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. For less than 10, the application may provide for a monetary contribution to the town's Affordable Housing Trust Fund in an amount which is reasonable as determined by the planning board under the relevant circumstances. That is the guidance and the level of specificity in the bylaw.
But we have asked the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to give us some thoughts.
Well, I just think it would help us in the future to have some sort of policy as opposed to kind of making up numbers erroneously to what's reasonable every time a new project comes in.
That would
Well,
be helpful
here-
to
It
the
would
development
just create
side.
predictability.
Here we are.
Yeah.
But the real estate values change, so significantly over short periods of time, long periods of time, it's a moving
true.
target.
Sometimes the project proponent has come forward with a suggestion, and then we can respond to it. Because sometimes the way it can be determined is you look at the overall financial picture and what's reasonable, in terms of that overall financial picture on the development. So if you had an affordable lot, what would the value of that lot be, and what would that do to the market rate lot prices, and you come up with something in between, right? So some kind of a formula. And some towns do have formulas. But I did begin to look at this, I think it was last summer, in terms of inclusionary zoning policy, which is one of the things that the master plan had suggested that we take up. So I do think that's something we should take up in that context, of something that's a policy that kind of gets applied to this, it gets applied to other kinds of development that might come before us.
Again, I agree with everything you're saying, but I think we would really like some input for the viewing audience. We would really like some input from the Affordable Housing Trust trustees to give us some guidance as to where they would like to see that formula. It gives us a starting point for our conversation.
So how do we collect that input?
Tim's working on it.
They actually discussed it last night at their meeting.
Great.
you want to chat about
Did
that?
they come up with a formula?
Yes. Well,
Yes?
they recommended.
Fantastic.
Let me. The what at the last meeting I had presented a few different. Everyone does it differently. Is what the issue is. Some of the
When you
formulas.
say everyone, you talk about other towns.
Yeah. Some of the formulas are pegged to sales price. Some of them are pegged to the total construction cost, total development cost. And Cheryl, I think that you would be familiar with this. And what they wound up going with was something similar to the Commonwealth has a model inclusionary zoning bylaw, and what they recommend is, and basically what the trust voted on yesterday was the formula be the difference between the average assessed value of a house in Milton, the difference between that and the maximum affordable sales price of a house for a four-person household making 70% of area median income, which is basically the gap between the affordable price and what a developer or an owner would be.
Did you say what percentage of the area median income?
70.
70? Okay.
That's about $680,000.
The average assessed value?
No, yeah, I think
No.
you're, what?
No, it's the difference between the two?
It's the difference between the average assessed value of a house in Milton
It's 5 something.
and
Okay, what, do we know what that average
I
is?
think it's
500.
560, 556, something like
So
that. Oh,
say it's
560.
570,
Okay.
and the affordable house is 170, so that would be $400,000.
189.
189.
189?
Is the affordable?
is that a three-bedroom?
I don't know, it's the number that,
I think, because I looked at the LIP application for Woodmere, and it's like 206, 207. DHCD has a calculator that I ran some numbers through. The max sales price, and Mike, to your point, it is a moving target. The virtue of the recommendation that they made is that the average assessed value is always a gettable number. It's always updated by the assessor's office, and then the max sales price, that's a definition that's determined by DHCD. And again, it's not like saying this is X figure is what the number is going to be. It's always going to be something that's responsive to.
So what did the calculator
But
show?
this talks about a house.
Right, we have to
Right.
back, so you have to
Rather than
back
a
into
lot.
that. You have to back into that from the lot, right? You have to then take out the construction costs or something for the house.
I suppose. I mean,
Yeah.
you've got to do it two ways.
Right, I agree. And
So
then,
why don't you do that for the next meeting?
Well, so what do you want me to?
Well,
did
in
you-
other words, you
like,
have
when
to
you said you ran
remove
it-
the house from the lots.
you said
just
you
the
ran it
land
through a
value.
calculator?
Yeah.
What did it come out at?
Oh, this just happened last night. I haven't done this.
Oh,
this
okay.
one.
But you said, it was pretty simple in my mind. You said the average assessed value of a house in Milton
570.
minus the affordable house,
The max sales price.
back sales price of the affordable house. So it has nothing to do with taking away the house off the land or
That's
anything.
189.
It's two values.
So it's $381,000.
It's probably somewhere in that neighborhood,
What?
yeah.
That would-
For a house. These are
But that
lots.
contribution would
No,
be
no,
way
no.
too high
No,
for the
but
lot.
he's not saying lot.
No, I know, we'd have to then extract back to
But
get to the lot
using-
price from the
Using
381.
$381,000 as what the developer has to contribute for a lot without a house on it.
That's way too high.
What's the assessed, we could look at what the average ratio of the assessment is for land versus house on
Good
our,
idea.
They do it anymore.
they don't do it they don't do it in Milton anymore? They
don't
just
think so.
assess the building?
I don't know.
No,
They
they
have,
think
they
they
have
do.
delineated.
I think
yeah.
they still
They do
do,
it?
Yeah.
yeah.
Accessible.
Individual houses have it broken out.
Right.
I don't see why they wouldn't be able to.
But yours formula says nothing about extracting the price of the home off the lot, none of that stuff.
No,
He was
they're,
thinking we
they're,
would have to add a step to apply.
No, we'd have to add a step because this is lots, not houses. That's the challenge. Can we look at, can you call the assessor's office and just ask them if they have that, what the average ratio is between land versus building? Because that might be a starting point.
You can't really get an average value of a lot because all the
Because they're
lots
all
are different sizes.
Well, but, yeah, good point.
Well,
Every
Well,
lot,
can't you
every
just
lot
look
has
at
an assessment.
The average
But the land for a
But you-
10 acres
but
of
if we're
land with one
starting
house
with
on
the
it, the land's
average
gonna be
cost of a
worth
house
more.
in Milton, whatever that average is, we can just take the
Right.
homes in that value range
Mm-hmm.
and calculate it from there, right?
You could also look at the size of the lots instead of, because that average is going to factor in all different, well, I suppose.
The size of the lot.
Because that size house, the size of a house, a 3-bedroom for a family of 4 at 70% median is probably going to be smaller than some that would be skewed, would skew that average, is what I'm thinking.
But
So
the lot value should be similar.
Right.
the lot value should be
I'm
correct.
not questioning it, I'm just lost here a little bit. What was the formula Tim was talking about then, if it,
It's for an actual unit itself.
for a unit itself?
So that would be like a
I
Woodmere.
thought it was a formula to suggest the price that the developer should give to the Affordable Trust.
When they build a house.
The theory behind the formula
No,
is.
rather than build a house.
Yeah, this
Right,
is the
but
windmill
on a house-
situation where you've got the developer building units. This is
This is different.
But
For
this is
basically
the contribution he's gonna make rather than build
No,
a.
no, no. Mike, this is the contribution that he's gonna make rather than build a house, but when he's delivering a number of homes. We're looking to try to figure out what the contribution should be rather than delivering a lot in a project where you're delivering a number of lots. So that's the variation. So this calculation that Tim just came up with would be if this proposal was to deliver 8 homes, they're delivering 8 lots.
Typically, the assessed value for in total, the larger number, if you were to divide it, would be for the house itself. So presumably, the value of the lot is going to be less than half of that total of 570, whatever it is. And then if you said, I mean, so let's just say it were 200, for example, then, so that's the market rate, and whatever the 70% on the, if it's only 170, and you said half of, or you said it was 207? I don't know, just different numbers thrown around. So let's just say that the affordable was 200, and you said, so the value of that lot's going to be, somewhere less than 100,000 for sure. Probably the value of that lot's going to be maybe 30% of that total, 35%. I don't know if you have an idea, Ned, but that's the kind of difference that we're talking about. Something where the lot might be worth 200 versus where the lot's worth less than 100, and the difference between them would be less than 100,000. Now, that's the kind of number, what's in
Now,
the numbers.
the discussion about the lots, the zoning says so that shall be suitably restricted so that the single-family dwellings built thereon shall count on the subsidized housing inventory or its future equivalent. So, at the end of the day,
He has to deliver a lot in a house.
No, just a lot.
Except that
You can't use it unless the house qualifies for the subsidized housing inventory. You don't have to build it, though.
so who builds it?
You don't,
No
it
one
may
builds
never
it.
get
It may never
built.
get built. It almost becomes an unbuildable lot because it's not economically viable to build the house. So
So the
it ends up
preference
becoming.
is to get the payment.
Get the payment,
Right,
exactly.
because then you can put that towards
what's-
building a house on an otherwise unusable lot.
What's the minimum size lot we can have in this cluster development?
10,000 square feet.
10,000 square feet.
I think
We
the
can
assessor's
talk
office
about
can
this
help.
offline.
But I think the assessor's office can help us here. I think we're
I think you're in
actually
the
on
same
the
boat
right
as me,
path.
Tim.
No, we're on the right path. I mean, if it was 25 to 35% average on the land,
So if he's building more than 10, he doesn't have to build a house, he just has to give you a lot.
If he's creating lots, if you create lots, the Carverys created 55 lots in a subdivision that they did. They didn't build any of them, 0. They can create these lots and they don't have to build them. That's just the way it is.
so 25% of 380, so I think I'd use 35%, but I'm coming out to somewhere around, and then applying 80% to that because it's 8 instead of 10 would be somewhere around $75,000. I'm throwing that number out because just based on what we just did with
I'll
Tim,
take,
I have no idea if
I'll
it's the
take a
right
10,000
number.
square lot here for 75 grand.
Yeah, but you have to be income qualified, Mike. So you're going to have to give away.
You'd be surprised.
So I just want to clarify, my reason for initiating this conversation, which might have derailed this a little.
No, I think it was a
It's just
good
that I want to
conversation to
get
have.
something out of the way now, so that every time somebody comes in, it's not a new conversation every time, and people are getting treated differently
good
for whatever
conversation.
reason. It just seems wise, if this is the first one, to get a policy in place. If it needs to be adjusted as we go, fine, but it gives us a jumping off point.
I think it's
We've got
it's a good
Pulte
conversation.
coming in with a cluster development. Pulte is a big real estate developer.
This will be relevant for.
And whether or not the same formula should apply to Pulte as to this situation, I don't know.
Well, we can look, this is a similar size development to
If we come
Hamilton.
up with a, what?
This is a similar size development to Hamilton.
Maybe we want
So-
more money from Pulte.
The,
Well, Pulte's actually going to deliver homes, right?
Well, they're going to, exactly what they're going to do,
They're-
we
they're
don't
house
know
builders. I
because
assume
they
they're gonna
haven't,
deliver houses.
This is true.
told us.
They are home builders. but anyway.
Yes, this is true.
Anybody else on the board? Let's,
can I
So
just
so in other
say
words,
to
when
the-
this cluster development breaks up, I'm sorry, excuse me. The people that own this are not going to build any houses, they're just going to sell the lots.
or they can build the houses.
Or they can build the houses. It may be that,
It's likely that they will sell lots because he's a doctor, a surgeon. He's not a builder. But he may partner with someone who would, he may sell a bundle of lots to someone who would then develop homes. But the plan is to divide the property, give a lot to their daughter. The daughter is going to build a home on one of the lots. They're going to build a new home on one of the lots, and they will sell the main house and sell the other lots.
Can I just offer that last summer when I looked at inclusionary zoning bylaw, I did do some research. I think I looked at 10 or 15 other towns and what formulas they have. I don't have it in the front of my mind at the moment, but I can get that information out and send it over to Tim. At least we'll have that for background.
Send that to Tim, and we can circulate all
Yeah.
of this and start commenting
Yeah.
on it
And
at
I've-
the next meeting.
I would just want to say that I appreciate the fact that you talked to the neighbors when developing the plan. I think that's really important. But can we just clarify which neighbors participated in that discussion? Was it just the direct abutters?
It was people across the street, it was people, I mean, the Burkes have lived there for years. They're friends with everybody. They sent out a notice to all of the abutters. Had them, many of them to the house the other evening and discussed what they were proposing to do.
Right. Thank you.
So, one more comment.
Sure.
I would just say that I think that this cluster plan is achieving some of the things that one would hope would come from a cluster development plan, in that the trade-off that we're getting is to have preservation of natural landscape, of vista, which contributes to the quality, the sort of visual quality of the scenic street of Highland Street, and we're getting a contribution to an amount to be determined, but still a contribution to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So I think those are great things that get achieved by this type of plan. So if we're here to give suggestion that this is a good direction, then I say, yes, I think it's a good direction.
I agree with that last statement.
I'd like to hear more. I was going to ask the question before you asked when and how many people met with you, but I'd like to hear from the abutters and the neighbors before I would be, willing to say that I'm behind it.
Anybody else? Just two quick things from me. One is obviously roadways been a big topic of late on another project that we're working on. So be interested to see what we can come up with that sort of, to Cheryl's point, mitigates the impact from a stormwater standpoint, but also provides safe pedestrian walkways. And then I'd also just encourage some good thought to go into the orientation of these homes, especially on the lots where the homes are sitting behind other homes, just from a visual impact standpoint.
Those are the 3 of the 4 sort of long ones that are on the back. They are the design that the daughter has.
Okay.
And they're just placed on those 3 lots to
Yep.
give the sense that the lots could accommodate that design rather than have to go, perhaps pay their architect to redesign.
Right.
Jim DeSalle's actually worked with someone in Lexington who has developed this type of clustered subdivision with small lots and nicely scaled houses on the lots. And as I've looked at some of the photographs, those houses would seem to work well here. But you're right, there needs to be.
Yeah, and it's not, it's on the, it's on the cul-de-sac road, it's also to Highland Street. We've had that conversation before with your recent project at Woodmere, making sure that the houses that are, as visible from Highland look appropriate. So.
Well, from both ways. I mean, the fronts and rear have to get equal treatment.
Right, exactly. That's all I have, so I think we're all set. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you, I appreciate the input.
Before you leave, did you have something else you wanted to talk to us about tonight?
Yeah, I was just asking,
Yeah.
Before we move on?
talked about that. There's an issue that has popped, I can at least, it's not on the agenda, but if the board would entertain, at least.
If you'd like to just hear what it is, and we can decide where to go from there.
In the Woodmere project, the permit requires a Trex fence along the rear of the property that was to be green. We learned recently that the company no longer produces a green fence, and so we've got a couple of thoughts as to how to replace that. We'd like to recommend that the board allow us to replace the Trex fence with a cedar board fence. Then the boards can be individually replaced if they have to be allowed to weather naturally. It would be 8 feet tall, 1 inch by 6 foot 8 inch cedar boards mounted on 6 by 6 by 12 pressure treated post concrete. And so this issue has just popped up. Jack Dolly had a direct conversation with Bill Clark about this, and Jack and I spoke. So I understand that the issue, the availability of the 8 foot tall dark green composite fence is not available to be built. We think that the cedar board fence would be more attractive and would be easier to maintain.
Where is this fence?
All along the rear of the
Along
property.
Boston?
On the Boston side. So if you think about that lot, that is the,
I can bring it up on the GIS.
That'd be helpful.
okay,
Just look at it.
because it's the same shaped lot, it's just that the Highland Street frontage, which is the longer frontage, is actually more like the length of the property line along the city of Boston.
You were carrying that fence out beyond,
Yeah, I want to see.
And
there
was
a
coming
one
down to
butter,
6 feet and going out to Dana Avenue along the property owners, that one property
why did you give
owner.
us this net, the
Because
Trex?
that
if
was-
this- You're
that-
not using that.
This is what you approved in the special permit.
Okay, but you're not using
Not
this.
using it. We're proposing to change that, and we think it's a minor amendment without having to
I just
file.
hate to be the devil or the devil's advocate, but the whole concept of the Trex is there's no maintenance. So like the cedar fence is going to take maintenance. It's going to take more maintenance than this.
What colors is it available in at the height proposed? If not available in the green?
That's a good question. His suggestion is at first that green is not a, let's
Further
see,
this way.
Oh, sorry.
it's 865.
Right there.
Yeah, the search
Right there.
isn't
Right
doing
there.
it right now. There you
That's
go.
it. One,
So-
that the Trex fences don't naturally blend into the landscape. They'll tend to look like an eyesore. And the second is that they are, if there's a potential for graffiti, that the use of a non-natural material is more challenging with respect to maintaining it graffiti-free. If you get graffiti on a wooden board, you just change out the boards. So, that was a recommendation that was coming from their fence guy. The change from the composite fence to a wooden fence.
So could you just show us up here where it's gonna be?
If you
I don't
pull up
recall.
that,
Put the outline, yeah,
that whole line
from the heel of the hockey stick out.
goes from, goes all the way. Goes from, essentially from here to here.
And you went out to Dana.
Yeah,
And it drops to 6 feet, and it comes
that's,
down.
I remember that. I remember
Here.
we extended that.
It's extended for the benefit.
I remember
of
when we did
those
that.
neighbors, yeah. This is-
That's
this is a-
split rail or something.
Split
isn't it?
rail.
Things are convenient.
This is wooden fence.
Why, you can, I mean, why is Trex so, I mean, you're scrapping Trex. You say, no Trex, we're gonna do a wooden fence. Why not get a green fence from someone else of similar quality?
It's also,
I-
well, it's
what?
being suggested that the green doesn't blend well into the natural surroundings. It kind of stick out like a sore thumb as it's there over time. And a natural colored wooden fence will tend to blend more with the foliage that will be maintained along that.
One of the things
Edge.
that I think I asked when we were reviewing this was being mindful that it's also a border to another development, and that we wouldn't want to be an unfriendly neighbor to that development. So I would have to see, I think, the detail that you would be planning with the new proposed fence, that it wouldn't be something which would be diminishing the, the quality of the fencing. I thought that there was a landscape plan to have landscape elements near the fence as well. So in terms of what you said about not blending in, is there not plant material plan for it on the development side of it? I know you're not planning to do anything on the abutters side of it, but the abutters also on this side came to the meetings, so I think, they might want to know that the fence is being proposed to be changed and what it would look like from their side.
That's a fair
From
comment.
the Boston side?
There's two.
Dana Ave.
From the Dana Ave side, we heard from that neighbor. They asked for that fence, I
They
think.
asked for
He
that.
asked for the continuation of the fence that was being installed. I don't think they.
Would they then own the
Is
maintenance?
a dark green fence, does it make any sense that somehow it would be visually obtrusive?
No, but I do agree that a material that weathers could blend in better because it would blend into plant materials better. So you'd have bark of tree, and a weathered fence, but I still would like to see the detail because this provides shade, this provides some shadow, it provides a little detail, and
That's the language of the special permit.
do we not get
I mean,
that?
the whole concept of the Trex is, it's gonna look like that in 20 years. A cedar fence, I got a cedar fence in my yard.
this one for
After
everybody?
4 or 5 years, if you don't start painting it with
Here's
preservative,
a copy of
it's gonna fall apart. If you get kids, if there's people on the other side, if they throw a baseball or bounce something off it, you break pickets constantly.
Well, they're not going to remove the chain link fence, so it will be 2 feet away from the chain link fence on the Boston side, which will minimize graffiti, since
To either type of fence.
But I thought we also request that we have on the drawings a section through the fence which describes the detail that we can see in the photo. I mean, this doesn't describe the
No,
detail, but
we didn't. We simply showed this.
I don't have the
And
drawings with me.
This was the material that was shown to the board.
There's your answer
There is a maintenance
Cheryl, as
requirement.
proposed, the document fence would be substantially screened by the wooded rear setback area on the Milton side.
Right, that's what I recalled.
There is a maintenance requirement, Mike. Next sentence. So, I mean, they do have to maintain whatever
Well,
fence they
maybe,
put in good
maybe,
condition.
at the very least, we'd need to see if this is just a line of boards stretching 800 feet, because it's an 800-foot
It's a
fence.
long fence. A wall, really.
Oh, cedar or composite material, it's the same. Face of 8 foot high by 800 feet.
Well, except this composite is, as they say, I mean, it doesn't change color, but they do have, they do have a little bit of pattern in the,
Right, and to
in the
Cheryl's
way
point,
it's
the
built.
pattern continues to on both sides. The other nice thing about a Trex fencing is that there's no ugly side.
There's no
of the
backside
fence.
to
There's
it.
no backside
Right.
of the fence.
And it's going to be less maintenance, and it's going to be there for a longer period of time and look the same.
Well, they've identified the issue, and
Thank you for identifying the issue.
And I'd be curious, and you can't speak to it off the top of people's heads when you come in like that, but I would suppose there's another manufacturer beyond Trex. I mean,
and we may get some, since we're televised, we may get some people coming in and speaking to it, but shall we,
Yeah, at minimum, I think I'd like
Continue
to
with the-
hear from the neighbor that asked for the fence to be extended at a bare minimum.
but we could discuss this again next time, but I don't think that we would be in a position to approve it.
I've added this as an agenda item on Tuesday. If there's anything that can be prepared between now and then, I can do that, or if you just want to put it off until a regularly scheduled meeting.
I do think we need to hear from the neighbor too, if that could be done by Tuesday, then,
We might as well let it be televised. Just,
okay.
Yeah, that's how I feel.
I mean, I think
Understood, yep.
the fence has always been, as you point out, an issue that we have to deal with carefully.
All right, so we'll see you on May 12th then.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, I can wrap this up pretty quickly, I think, but I want to just briefly speak about the presentation, so to speak, for town meeting. So we have, as we discussed, we have 4 bylaws we submitted, 3 are coming back. 1 is moving forward, that's administrative, that will be, that's
One
self-explanatory.
is being canned,
Which one's that, the Board of Selectmen?
2 are coming back.
The taxation one's just being canned, is that how that works?
Well, the selectmen can,
They can take it up
They
if they
can
so choose.
take it up if
Got
they
it,
want it,
Gotcha,
but-
okay. So those 2 are basically self-explanatory. For the B and B and the non-conforming, my basic plan was to get up and, to Alex's point, make the recommendation that these bylaws need more work. We have had a number of meetings on them, and we'd like some time to have some additional meetings on them. And specifically to bed and breakfast, I think I wanted to just briefly mention that there are currently, as of today, 4 bed and breakfast listings on Airbnb. There was an opinion rendered at one of our meetings by one of our local attorneys that apparently actually, I'm sorry, it was Cheryl, I think.
That came from
That
Joe
that came from
Prondak.
Joe Prondak, that there's actually already a provision in the bylaw that allows bed and breakfasts for under 4 bedrooms. And that there is a tax revenue component here, although I think I'm not sure that's the basis, and that we were looking to preserve estate. So that was really I wanted to give the introduction as to why we were bringing this forward, and that we were looking to create ways to make sure that they were being properly regulated. We need more time to study it. We need to talk to more people. We need to talk to some of the property owners. We probably need to talk to the Board of Health. So we have some work to do on this, and again, recommend it come back to us. Non-conforming, I'm a little more unsure of how to proceed, because I think there's certainly more division among the ranks here as to whether we should even be discussing it. So I think we can simply recommend it come back for more study, or we can show some of the work we've already done, only in the sense of where the sites are and what the process is for those sites. I think I'd like to just defer to the board at this point as to which direction they want to go on that presentation.
This is the original article that we have, so
Understood.
it would be the Milton Club,
Yep.
Granite Avenue thing. And in other words, the sites
Are not inclusive,
are,
all-inclusive.
there are significantly more sites than the next version, which
Right.
presumably would become
Reduced it.
the next version.
Right, understood.
I don't think
So I
that
think that makes- I think that's a good
discussing particular sites until the board is, we don't have any consensus at this point
I agree.
on the board that these sites are appropriate, so I certainly don't think that we should present them to the town meeting. Why don't you just say
I
that?
think I might just say that. We don't have consensus as to what sites are appropriate and what the qualifications should be,
how
and we
to
need
deal
more
with
work.
them.
Okay,
So-
so, but could we have some discussion at the moment about whether there's consensus that people would like this to be studied? Because we heard people come to us, some people felt as if, some sites might be a bit blighted, a little bit blighted, and some
Or a
sites might.
lot blighted.
And some sites might not, right? But what we're really talking about is trying to structure some zoning that could apply to more than one site. And I think if we just make that if we have that kind of an agreement, that kind of zoning is going to take more analysis, but it also will provide in the end, if we're successful and people understand it and ever come to agreement, that it will provide a path that is more straightforward for property owners and for potential property owners. Because one of the things I think about a blighted site myself is that it's hard for a buyer to come in with any kind of understanding of what they might be able to do with the site. And so they're going to stay the way they are, in my concern is. So for the neighbor who lives nearby, they might like to see some process where they know, and if they buy a house near one of these sites, that they know that there's a process that's somewhat already been vetted and outlined rather than a Board of Appeal process.
So my experience at town meeting is that people are not generally shy, and that I can certainly suggest to the town meeting, as I'm making a very limited presentation, that they are certainly welcome to come up and give us their general opinions about the merits of these two bylaws. But
I'm not
but not to delve
yeah.
into specifics, because the specifics are not being, that we're recommending the specifics come back to us, and the appropriate time to speak to the specifics will be in that process.
No, what I actually, not suggesting that they speak at town meeting to the issue, but that we lay out what we're trying to do, and then they can take an interest in coming to participate in a process that we're going to say is going to happen over the next, between this spring town meeting and the fall town meeting.
The problem is there's not consensus on the board right now as to
Right.
whether or not we want to even have that conversation
And
on
we
that
have,
specific
I
item.
mean, this is the conversation we should have had tonight if we were planning to say something to town meeting next Tuesday or Wednesday.
So I think
Thursday, Wednesday we get off.
I think that opening it up to comment on the floor of town meeting is not a good idea. I just feel like,
Well, by
It's
the way,
the
it's
end of-
open to town
not-
meeting.
well, that's
So
anybody can speak
they can
anytime they
speak to
want
it
anyways,
anyway.
right? With the moderator's permission, I suppose. But to encourage people to offer comment on what could be night 3 of a town meeting, I don't know if that's going to be the most productive
Well,
use
one-
of anybody's time.
I think you're going to get some anyway.
You're going to
Yeah.
get some
Once it
anyway.
opens
Right.
up, it opens up.
I
You're gonna-
think that it will
you're gonna get
take
some
1 minute for the warrant committee to say, we recommend this go back to the planning board, and I think that anyone who dares say, wait a minute, I
need
want to
something
say
to say.
something,
We'll get the Alex Whiteside stare down.
it's just not going to happen
can I-
unless we try and make it happen. And if we try and make it happen, we're not going to be happy about the results, because for one thing, I mean, the non-conforming business bylaw is the one that we're all agreed is no good. It had to be
The one that's out
updated.
there,
It may
right.
not, no good may not be the right word, but deficient in a number of respects. And the B&B is deficient in a number of respects also. It seems to me that if we want to get the town meeting talking about our work, we want to have some good work for them to talk about. And I think that we should simply say, send this one back.
So-
And I saw what the warrant committee said, and they said that, I think, largely because we were moaning and groaning about how people didn't get involved in our activities. We can deal with that without opening it up at town meeting.
One of the things I'd like to suggest, though, is that zoning articles require town meeting members to be involved before they get to town meeting. And we need to alert them to the fact that this is work that's going to be done, and it's going to be done this year and probably next year on the zoning. And if they're interested, they need to check the planning board's website, our agenda, our look-aheads that we're going to be adding that we just talked about. Because I feel as if there's a lot of work that goes into zoning articles before they get to town meeting, and there's a lot of people who are completely uneducated about them. Even if there's been a forum made available in advance, letters and emails go out to town meeting members. I've been at a few where there's been a handful of town meeting members who come. And then you get on the floor of town meeting and people, it's not stuff that you're going to digest in a few minutes, and especially if you're going to look at any kind of amendments. So I do think we need to advocate for town meeting to be involved so that they are informed when they get to the October town meeting.
I will definitely do that. I will definitely encourage involvement. I will definitely encourage them all to sign up for the town clerk's website, email distribution list, so that when we are having a meeting, we can announce it. When we have something to post on the web, we can send a link.
And I think it's important to add, and we're going to try to do a little bit better job with communications on our side as well.
Yeah, that's fair. I've been a little more defensive on the communication side than because I really truly believe a few things. One is we have a legal obligation to provide communications, and we have to be careful not to create a legal precedence for one versus another. So we have to be very careful that we're doing things on a consistent
But
basis.
you never have done this before. Plotted the schedule for the next few months.
Well,
I mean, I think that's an extra effort. I think it's worth noting. I think people
but I'm
would
not sure we
appreciate
would.
it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure we'll publish it. This is, so it's part of the public record. But I think we just have to. I'm not going to own all of the responsibility for the non communication. There's,
No,
we hear people all the time say, "Well, I don't read the Milton Times."
I don't know that it's
Well, then read the
non-communication or
Milton Times.
non-response to communication.
I just think it's a nice gesture because we've heard the complaint.
It's fine to an extent.
So can I just get to, I'm sorry to interrupt. Can I just respond to your question, which was, I think, if I understood it correctly, where do people stand on this issue? Kind of vetting, is this the appropriate time to do that or no?
I mean, in terms of town meeting or in
On
terms of the?
non-conforming, the non-
Oh, non-conforming. Oh, I don't know if you intended for that to be.
I don't think we need to go down that rabbit hole
Okay.
tonight.
Yeah. I think what I was just trying to do was to make sure that we were all in agreement on how we were going to address this at town meeting, that's all.
That's all.
Briefly,
I think you can,
hopefully.
I think you can tell
We'll
them,
be looking to sit down as quickly as possible. I
Well,
assure you.
exactly, because if people are going to be tired, and they will like the planning board better
I
if
agree
you
with
don't
you.
try and
you could suggest that
say, we want to go till next Monday.
the non-conforming has, it's already evolved further than what's in print.
Absolutely.
you could suggest that.
You could say
Absolutely. I mean,
that,
I
yes.
can say
I don't
that.
think that
No, I don't mean to effectively dissuade or persuade people. I just mean to let them know that it does need to come back, because not only will it evolve further, but it's already evolved further than what you see in front of you, to try to, get it correct.
I mean, you can say that,
form.
but why?
I'd like,
Especially since we're
Well, no,
supposed
say
to
less than,
get
okay.
stuff on the warrant
I'm just trying to convince
that's
people that it
final.
needs to come back, but if they're convinced, then that's good. But as far as when you first started, is about like opening up the town meeting for, I don't know, for lack of better terminology, discussion, the way I took it is to mean was not to critique the bylaw that's written down, but just to get up and say, in general, do people believe that it's a necessary bylaw, to people that believe that
It's a
it's something which should
discussion
be
we
taken
should,
out.
the planning board should even have.
That's
that what you
what I
want?
thought you were heading to.
That is what I was heading to.
I don't think that we should ask people to critique it, because
Absolutely not.
for the reason I just said, there's no point in critiquing it, because it's already evolved
I will
further than
stand
what's
up
here in
as the
print.
chair and ask the moderator to shut that
I
part
mean,
of
if
the
it wasn't for
discussion
time,
down.
Alex, I'd say, yeah, please, if there is any opinion out there as to whether or not this is a road the planning board should be heading down, I think that'd be a good idea, other than the fact that some of these town meetings run until 10 and 11 o'clock at night. And
the issue I have with that, though, is there's no context for that, and I think that's a problem, because we've had people come in, people who own property next to these kind of businesses. We've had attorneys who represent some of the owners of the properties who say, we would like you to look at it. So I don't think we should say, do you think it's a good idea or not for us to look at it on the floor of town meeting, because they will have no context in which to understand whether that makes sense or not.
Fine. We'll push, to Alex's point, to Cheryl's point, we'll push for participation in the future process and
All right,
hopefully go home.
and brevity.
I will do my best.
I think that makes sense.
Yep, okay, I will entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Have a nice evening, everyone.
Congratulations,
See you
first
on
meeting.
Monday.
Escaped unscathed.
I meant to bring
I very much would like